Greetings and welcome back. We are in Senior AP English and we are working with Hamlet. Our ambition today is to work with Hamlet Act 3. However, I want to go back to Hamlet Act 2, and I just want to point out the ways in which Shakespeare's able to say things, especially to his intelligent audience, his philosophic audience. He's able to say things without actually saying them. I want to go back in Act 2 to that scene where Polonius comes onto the stage to tell Hamlet about the actors showing up. He says, the best actors in the world, and then Shakespeare kind of making fun of the old man, either for tragedy, comedy, history, pastoral, pastoral, comical, historical, pastoral. You maybe will find that. Go ahead and find that in your text real quickly. When he begins to kind of list all of the different kinds of plays that these actors can do. Hamlet, however, in my folio, this is roughly around lines 430 or so. Hamlet will look at old fart Polonius and call him Jephthah. Now, remember earlier in this scene, right? Hamlet will have said to Polonius, when Polonius asks him, "Do you know me?" He will say, "Yeah, I know you. You're a fishmonger." And Polonius is like, I'm not a fishmonger. And Hamlet goes, right, I wish you were so honest a man. Right, calling you a fishmonger and calling you a pimp is an insult to all the pimps of the world. That's how bad you are. A little bit later, Polonius will say, he didn't even know who I was. He's far gone. He's like lost his mind. Now Hamlet will call Polonius Jephthah, judge of Israel. Okay, so find those lines in your play there. What page am I on, Mr. Wilson?
124.
124. Hamlet will call Polonius Jephthah, judge of Israel. To which Polonius will say, Jephthah, judge of Israel, what a treasure hast thou? Polonius is like, what treasure, my lord? Polonius has no idea what's being said. The intellectual audience, though, who's watching this play, if they know the story of Jephthah, immediately catch on to exactly what the game Shakespeare's playing here. I just want to point this out. A number of years ago, I was lecturing this play to a group of AP students, and I said, okay, tell us the story of Jephthah. And I was stunned. I didn't have a single student in the room who knew the story of Jephthah. Which I say I was stunned because the majority of my students I knew full well had been raised going to some kind of religious gathering. And I was like, none of you know the story of Jephthah from the Judeo-Christian Bible? And they were like, no. And I said, all right, I'll give additional points on the test sheet if somebody in the next 5 minutes can come back to tell me who Jephthah was. This is before handheld devices could easily access online this intel. And they were out running all over the building asking people who Jephthah was to come back. Do I have anyone in here who knows the story of Jephthah? I'll point it out in fairness. This is not one of the stories that usually gets shared in Sunday school. They usually will skip over this little story. Jephthah is a judge of Israel. He's going into battle. He makes a promise to God if what?
If he does one battle, the first thing he sees when he comes home.
If I win, the first thing I see when I come home, I'll sacrifice to God. Of course, this makes sense because Jephthah owns 10,000 cows, right? I mean, he's a huge cattle owner. So the first thing he's going to see is going to be a cow. He's going to sacrifice a cow. Let me win and I'll sacrifice a cow. Jephthah has one beautiful little daughter. The word comes back that he's won the battle. Mama tells daughter, daughter's so happy that daddy didn't die in the war. She runs out to meet Jephthah. As he comes around the corner, the very first thing he sees is his daughter. Now Jephthah's got a serious problem. He made a promise to God that he would sacrifice the first thing he saw once he came home. By the way, for those of you interested, you can footnote this as Judges chapter 11. Judges is a book in the Old Testament of the Bible. It's maybe a book you're familiar with, at least in name. Judges chapter 11 will tell this story. Jephthah must sacrifice his own daughter because of a promise that he made for victory. We immediately at 3a as well remember what text when you hear that story. If you know anything about Greek mythology, what immediately is a story that comes to mind? Write it down if you can recall it. It's a story about a man who wants to go off to fight in a war, and to get there he has to appease the goddess Artemis, and he must sacrifice his daughter. What was her name? Does anyone remember? Her name was Iphigenia. Iphigenia is the daughter of what great king warrior? Agamemnon, that's right. And of course, the homecoming of Agamemnon, where his wife Clytemnestra Jackson, has everything to do with the fact that he killed his own daughter. Question, before we move on to Act 3. What game is Shakespeare playing here by having Hamlet call Polonius Jephthah? Jephthah, judge of Israel, what a treasure hast thou?
He has a daughter, that's it.
Polonius has a daughter. I don't understand though. What point is Shakespeare making here? In the same way that Jephthah was willing to sacrifice his own daughter to get victory, to get what he wanted, what is Hamlet saying about Polonius in regards to his relationship to Ophelia?
He uses her.
He uses her. That's going to be the key, right? She is a pawn. She will get used. He says to Polonius ostensibly, how dare you treat your daughter this way? What's going to be ironic about that? A few seconds later, we're in Act 3. Yeah, when he gets his chance to treat Ophelia, doesn't do a very nice job of it, does he? Right, we'll get to that now. Let's turn to Act 3. I think I said to you before that Hamlet, the play Hamlet, Act 3, is considered by many scholars one of the greatest single acts Shakespeare ever constructed. Many have argued it's a play unto itself. It's a dramatic composition unto itself. There is so much going on here that I won't be able to talk about, and allow me to apologize in advance for that. But I'll at least try and give you some sense of the genius, the sheer genius of the construction of this act. Notice where we began. We start with King speaking with R&G. He's asking Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, can you figure out what's wrong with this kid? Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are totally lost. Hamlet has been playing word games with them the entire time. So Rosencrantz and Guildenstern will say, you know, we're not exactly sure, but he did seem to become really happy and animated. We mentioned something about these actors showing up. And then immediately Polonius says, oh yeah, I'm supposed to invite you and your wife to come and watch a performance. Hamlet got really giddy about this. He's all excited. Ironically, the king says, I'd love to come. The audience, of course, recognizing this is going to be the downfall of Claudius, that he walks right into the mousetrap, is what it will be called later. Then we understand that there's a plan at foot. Notice that the king will say to Gertrude, sweet Gertrude, leave us, for we have closely sent for Hamlet hither, that he as 'twere by accident may here affront Ophelia. So we're going to have more of this spy theme thing happening as we already encountered it. We're going to put Hamlet and Ophelia together. We're going to hide and we're going to watch this exchange. The assumption is that Hamlet is in love with Ophelia, but she's not returned his advances. Once we put them together, the expectation is that Hamlet will immediately fall down on his knees and say, oh yes, Ophelia, I'm so happy to have a chance to see you. He will treat her nice, and he will no longer be crazy or love mad because Ophelia's been instructed to be nice to him, right? If things work out. Notice the queen will say to the king, I'll obey you. And then interestingly, look what she says. She turns to Ophelia. The queen speaks to Ophelia, and look what she says. I do wish, and for your part, Ophelia, I do wish that your good beauties be the happy cause of Hamlet's wildness. Notice Mama, she can't call it insanity. She calls it Hamlet's wildness. The overprotective mom. She interestingly says, I really hope that you're the reason my son's gone nuts. Now what's interesting about that is that both Laertes and Polonius have said to Ophelia, you can't have Hamlet because Mom will never approve of it. Here, she seems to approve of it. I hope all this is for my son is that he's totally taken with you and your beauties. So shall I hope your virtues will bring him to his wonted way again, to both your honors. There seems to be a suggestion here that Mama's okay with Ophelia maybe being Hamlet's girl. Then she leaves. Ophelia will say, I hope so too. Polonius then will step forward. He has a book. So much of this play you have to see. You can't just hear it. He has a book. He will give the book to Ophelia and he will say the following. These lines we must follow closely. The mistake often made is to study closely the to be or not to be soliloquy. But we have to see that that famous soliloquy is bookended by two really important set of lines. The first we're about to see happens before the to be or not to be soliloquy. The second happens immediately after with the get thee to a nunnery scene. And we've got to see the entire composition to really appreciate the genius of what Shakespeare's going to pull off here. Notice what Polonius will say to Ophelia. Ophelia, walk you here. I want you to walk right here, he says to Ophelia. Gracious, so please you, we will bestow ourselves, he says to the king. And then he turns back to Ophelia. Look what he says. Read on this book, that show of such an exercise may color your loneliness. Put it in your own words. Don't use your sidebar to help you. Try and figure it out on your own. What has he just told his daughter? I want you to read on this book, that show of exercise may color your loneliness. What does he mean by this? Any ideas? What?
Make you not lonely. Like you have
Yes. What are we doing? We're tricking. We're setting up Hamlet. What does he say to his daughter? Yeah, pretend like you're reading a book. So when Hamlet comes on stage, he won't suspect anything. He'll just assume that what you're doing is reading a book. And then the two of you can naturally bump into each other. Keep going. We are off to blame in this. This is pure Polonius. He's the fool speaking the most remarkable lines that will lead a thinking audience to go, fascinating that he would say that. Take a look at what he says. We are off to blame in this. 'Tis too much proved that with devotion's visage and pious action, we do sugar o'er the devil himself. Whoa, whoa, whoa. What did we just read? Now, if I had time, and I don't, but if I had time, we could do what I'm doing right now with all of the major plays of Shakespeare. And we would grow remarkably from a closer study of the play. A line like this, just nicely buried within the scene, we're going to find them in Macbeth. We're certainly going to find them in King Lear. If I could take the time to point them out to you, I'll point this out on the hope that as you begin to do your own reading, maybe not this semester, it might be later in your life, when you finally pick up the plays of Shakespeare to study them on your own, many of you will, believe it or not, and you'll go back to find lines like this and you'll ask, what did he just say? And what's significant about what he just said? He gives his daughter a book. Go back now to the lines and let's look closely. He gives his daughter a book and he says, read on this book that show of such an exercise may color your loneliness. We are off to blame in this, 'tis too much proved, that with devotion's visage and pious action, we do sugar o'er the devil himself. What did he just say? We are off to blame in this, 'tis too much proved. In other words, what I'm about to say is it gets dark at night. Obvious, true. What is? That with devotion's visage. Now, if I'm driving in my truck and I want to keep the sun out of my eyes, I will drop down my visor. The word visage and visor of or relating to the face. Okay? 'Tis too much proved that with devotion's visage, a devoted face would mean what? You look like what in your face? Like you're really true or honest or devoted. And pious action. Now, what is the word pious? My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. Maybe some of you are familiar with that little Wordsworth ditty. The child is father of the man, the poem ends, and I could wish my days to be bound each to each by natural piety. It's the same word. Pious or piety means what?
Reverence for God.
It's reverence, right? It's reverence, in many ways, often for God. That with devotion's visage, an honest face, and pious action, we do sugar o'er the devil himself. Whoa, whoa, whoa. What did he just say? You can fool even the devil. All you need are two things. What do you need? An honest face and actions that appear to be pious. If you've got those two things, you can fool anyone. Right? We'll come back tomorrow or on Monday to do a little review and then